Thanksgiving is not yet a holiday. Coke costs 5 cents a bottle, and a gallon of gas is only 10 cents. Disney's Dumbo marvels audiences, while reminders of the Great Depression continue to linger. And Glenn Miller's song about a train in Chattanooga becomes certified gold. It's fall 1941. While much of the world is embroiled in near global conflict, the backyards, main streets, and dirt roads of the United States remain deceptively quiet most of the time. It can be argued that life was simpler before December 7, 1941. But all nostalgia aside, the world did change at the advent of World War II. If the American spirit created the backbone for the arsenal of democracy, it was the railroads that fused its nervous system. But 100 years after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the mighty instrument of progress that had propelled the people forward watched as its patronage motored past to independent reliance on the automobile, airplane, and freshly paved highway. What remains today of what was once over 200,000 miles of rail and tie is an industry on the resurgence, having withstood bleaker times and now prepared for better days. Like the country it has served, the railroads have evolved, shifting focus from passenger operations to freight and merchandise traffic. A vast infrastructure of iron road and rich heritage remains in the wake of this transformation, but the golden age of railroading is long over. Here at Detroit's Michigan Central Station, a 15-story, 96-year-old banner of a bygone era stands deteriorated, slated for an uncertain future and possible demolition. Its fate is not unlike thousands of other relics from railroad history. But 92 miles north of Michigan Central, 400 tons of railroad history has managed to survive. And in July of 2009, it had company. July 23rd through the 26th saw the Steam Railroading Institute in Owasso, Michigan host an historic event, TrainFestival 2009, one of the largest railroad celebrations in modern history. In 4 days, nearly 40,000 visitors from all 50 states and all around the world descended on Owasso. For a town in the middle of a state known for the problems its auto industry has suffered, the sudden infusion of railroading enlivened the city of only 15,000 residents. TrainFestival was an effort spearheaded by Chairman Jason Johnson and administered by the Steam Railroading Institute's director, T.J. Gaffney, and Chief Mechanical Officer Greg Udolph. Before TrainFestival, the Steam Railroading Institute was known for being home of the Polar Express, more commonly known as Père Marquette Berkshire-type locomotive number 1225, which gained notoriety as the engine used as the reference for the locomotive in the film adaptation of the children's book. 1225 and 1223 are the only remaining Père Marquette Berkshires, a class of locomotive that is one of the most well-preserved larger mainline engines. The Berkshires were advanced technological achievements in steam locomotion when the type was first built in 1925. Several railroads, including the Nickel Plate and Chesapeake and Ohio, stayed the scrapping of these respected iron workhorses for donation and preservation.
Père Marquette, like a lot of railroads during the Great Depression, was coming out of a very tough period And the two surviving engines, 1223 and 1225, represent that middle order, and they wanted as much bang as they could get for their buck. The Berkshires were very much a pinnacle of what superpower meant when Lima was talking about that in their ads. The way that they were built, the way that they were designed, allowed those locomotives to be turned right around and put on another freight train and ready to go. By the time 1225, in a very short 10-year career, rolled her last revenue mile, she put 500,000 miles behind her. Most of that was during the war. The locomotives, after their service life had ended in basically early 51, 52, were simply parked. In some cases, these engines sat for almost a decade. 1223 went to the Michigan State Fairgrounds in Detroit originally, and 1225 was saved basically through the efforts of a gentleman by the name of Forrest Akers, who was on the Board of Regents for Michigan State University at the time. Had a passion for the role the railroad had played in the Midwest, and basically he is the reason 1225 was saved. So in 57, the engine was dedicated in the Chesapeake and Ohio scheme, which it never wore in regular service, with its original 1225 number, and it was dedicated there and was parked by the heating plant for a number of years, and there it sat. 1969, a crazy group of college kids were sitting in her cab one day and thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to possibly restore this thing. And by the time the early 1970s rolled around, these guys actually thought, well, hey, let's go this one step and actually crack into this thing. They had the engine torn down. I believe they actually started pulling off the jacketing and what have you, and really got the work sessions to the point that by the fall of 74, early part of 75, I believe, they were actually to the point where they felt they were going to be ready for a steam up.
On October 5th, 1975, the Michigan State University Railroad Club fired up Père Marquette Berkshire number 1225 on the MSU campus. This was the culmination of 6 years of work. The 1225 had not known steam for 22 years. After all this silence, it was good to hear her speak again. After so many years as a silent showpiece, the cab was once more the center of activity. The restoration is well along towards the day when cracking this throttle will set her 400 tons in motion again. While she didn't move anywhere at this fire-up, she did put on a splendid display the way only steam locomotives can.
As the project got farther along and closer to a stage where they were looking to actually operate it, the Ann Arbor Railway at that time was in bankruptcy and officially went into bankruptcy by 1982. And so the car shops, and particularly the steam era back shop, became available here in Owasso, and a deal was worked out where for $1 a year rental basically from the state of Michigan, they would be able to use that steam facility. The entire back shop itself mounted to, I believe, 3 stalls, and the shop area itself still existed, but it was only a portion of the original entire building. And it was in very rough shape. I can remember there was a lot of sort of hubbub in the rail fan community about the fact they may actually get this thing fired up this year, you know. I remember coming over, and what I remember most, the sound of the rails groaning when she first moved out under her own power. It was something else.
As an organization, SRI has undergone significant changes in recent years. offering regularly scheduled train rides behind number 1225, while bringing thousands to the middle of Michigan each year.
Given our origins as the Michigan State University Railroad Club, we grew from a small band of college kids, to our evolution to the Michigan State Trust for Railway Preservation. But now SRI, has grown tremendously, not only in terms of membership, but in terms of our staff. We now have a total of 6 full-time staff members who help keep this operating railroad museum fully functional.
For TrainFestival 2009, not only would SRI receive a makeover, but the 1225 would experience a number of substantial upgrades to carry it through until mid-2010, when the Federal Railroad Administration's guideline for steam locomotive operations mandate that the locomotive boiler and appliances be inspected, repaired, or replaced for safe and efficient future preservation and operation.
The crew of people that the railroads had in order to maintain a fleet of these things was enormous, and the amount of money that they spent on them just to keep them running was just astronomical.
Particularly in the case of the Pure Marquette, you have to remember who one of the major customers was, at least in the state of Michigan, and that was General Motors. And General Motors was the owner of EMD, which produced most of the locomotives at that point. The fact that the state of Michigan was where GM was located, I don't think it was something that was lost on them. It's the Eisenhower administration. There's serious money going into highway development. And I think people began to see the writing on the walls. Railroads began to see, the possibilities of, particularly for expense savings, that diesels brought about. Labor was one of the biggest ones, and hundreds of employees of all kinds of different professions, from Boilermakers to pipe fitters to airmen to you name it, were all tied particularly to that locomotive. What was happening at that particular time on the railroads and that transition from steam to diesel was as dramatic for the railroads as what is currently going on with the auto industry. It became a situation where entire groups of people lost their jobs. This is all you knew. And making that transition was very, very difficult. And some guys just weren't able to do it. It's really easy to say, well, you just need to go get another job. But when there's no other job for the thing that you trained all of your life to do, what do you do? Properly maintained and properly run, these engines could be, on a one-to-one basis, they could hold their own. When you had a perfect situation and the engines were ready to go and you had the basis and the labor force to take care of them, they could be comparable in a lot of ways.
Steam locomotives are as powerful as diesels. I mean, just to test out 1225 this year before TrainFest, we took it out, we put it on the front of a 60-car freight train, and the railroad here would have easily had two if not 3 diesels on it, and we hauled that train away like it was nothing. We did a lot of work to 1225 this year to prepare it for its final season. We put a lot of time and money into the locomotive to fix some of the problems that had been ailing the engine for quite a number of years. One of the big things that we did this year is we did some major work to the wheels on the trailing truck. What we found when we were doing an inspection before the beginning of the year is that one of the tires had a crack in it. So we decided that if we were going to do that work, we were going to do the boxes and the springs and everything to make sure that everything was done on that section of the trailing truck. One of the biggest things that stood in our way to do the wheel was not having the ability to get the wheel out from under the engine. Luckily, we have very, very good neighbors at the Great Lakes Central. and they were kind enough to clear out one of the bays in their shop. Shop foreman over there came in on a Saturday and dropped the wheel out. Not only did we do quite a bit of work to the wheels and the running gear and the boiler, we also did something that this engine hasn't had in years and years. We completely sanded the locomotive down and repainted it. The volunteers spent weeks completely sanding the engine. We painted it with DuPont, just the lower grade than Imron, because I didn't feel like we needed to put the money into it that we put into the tender, as all of the jacketing is going to be replaced next year and the wheels are going to get some attention. I wanted to make sure it looked good, and it had to look good for the end of its second career here. When it comes back out, it'll have another fresh coat of paint on it.
While TrainFestival began as a fundraiser for work on the 1225, it quickly became all that and more. Originally, the event was to feature one or two large mainline locomotives and several smaller engines. But as word about the event spread, the potential for a one-of-a-kind event grew considerably and culminated in the decision to bring one of the world's most famous locomotives all the way from Portland, Oregon, to the big show. Southern Pacific number 4449, otherwise known as the Daylight, is a high-stepping 484 Northern type locomotive that gained fame as motive power for the American Freedom Train in the 1970s. The endeavor to bring the 4449 east to Michigan was a challenge almost unheard of, but the TrainFestival organizers and partners, with their combined experience and expertise, were more than ready and willing to tackle it.
When we announced the Daylight was going to be at the event, it was met with quite a bit of skepticism. Most people thought there was no way that we would be able to bring the Daylight all the way from Portland, Oregon to Wausau, Michigan and return it. With economics and just the logistics of it, we were met with a lot of skepticism, and even up until the week before it left Portland, many people thought that it was still nothing more than a PR stunt, and were not happy.
When the festival first came about, much of what influenced it was the realization that we had this rebuild coming with 1225. And when we began into it, it was a very different economy than it is right now. We continued to move forward because we had seen positive signs when we first launched those web tickets in August that there was an interest. It culminated in a conversation with Doyle McCormick, led by Mike Manweller, and said the 4449 group has an interest in coming to the event. The state of the economy was such that we knew going in that bringing 4449 was not going to be an inexpensive endeavor. Bringing any steam locomotive any distance is not an inexpensive endeavor. But all of us agreed, and particularly by the time that we had taken that back and talked with Jason about it, that of all the locomotives out there, if there was anything that was going to directly affect the event, it was going to be 4449.
The Daylight trip was quite a challenge. We had to bring out the people within the industry that had the wherewithal to make it actually happen. And we got the Friends of the 4449, the Friends of the 261 out of Minneapolis, that has a long 15-year history of running excursions. The only way to operate a successful steam operation cross-country is to involve Amtrak. And essentially operating on foreign railroads that Amtrak had to get permission on and operate on. Those railroads include the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, the Canadian Pacific Railway, the Canadian National Railway, Norfolk Southern, Great Lakes Central, and the Ann Arbor Railroad. All of these railroads had to go through a whole process to approve the locomotive, the train. This was a 5-month process to make the excursion happen. To bring the Daylight all the way from Portland to Michigan is not without its problems. The Daylight is an extremely large locomotive, and railroads aren't necessarily built nowadays to accommodate locomotives the size of the Daylight. We actually did run into a problem in Chicago at the 11th hour. We were actually in Minneapolis 2 days before the train was ready to go through Chicago to come to Michigan. Somebody found a bridge that would have been an issue and was actually 2 inches too narrow to fit the daylight through. Through a lot of hard work by our friends of the 261, Steve Sandberg, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, Norfolk Southern, the Inner Harbor Belt Railway in Chicago, were able to all come together and come up with a solution to get around the bridge and clearance issue that still provided the people out of Chicago a train ride behind the daylight and get the ultimate goal of the train to Owasso, Michigan.
With the ready aid of the Friends of the 4449 and Milwaukee Road number 261, daylight would reach Michigan.
To have 4449 roll into Durand was emotional. There was a collective sigh of, man, she made it here.
It was such a relief to see it pulling in Durand, knowing it's just a few miles away from Owasso in the event that we'd actually pulled off 3,000 miles one way from Portland, Oregon, all the way to Owasso, Michigan.
In addition to the 1225 and the 4449, recently overhauled sister Berkshire number 765 of the Nickel Plate Road from Fort Wayne, Indiana, would rejoin 1225 for the first time in 18 years, following a tremendous series of operations that saw the two locomotives operate in tandem excursion service in 1991 through the New River Gorge in West Virginia. Owned and maintained by the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, the 765 has operated over 52,000 miles in excursion service. She was back on the main line after a 16-year absence and an extensive overhaul that returned the locomotive to as-built condition.
It had been a significant amount of time since the two locomotives were together. Some key people who had been involved in that had passed on in both groups, had moved on. So much had happened to both groups in that time. 765 had been through a full rebuild. 1225 had a brand new set of siphons in there. It was no longer, just a group in the back shop anymore. They were coming to our site. It just was phenomenal. And the whole world, as we all knew, of steam had changed so dramatically from 1991. 765's whistle could first be heard coming in, it definitely brought a tear to several of our eyes. The two of them whistling off at each other, and the relationship that had started to come back together, I think, between different members of the two groups. It was a culmination of a lot, but I think, in many ways, I think it's the beginning of a lot too. To see those two engines back together, the two Lima sisters, was very, very emotional for a lot of us. The groups were in different places, but the engines were still here, and I think that was the biggest thing. Is, I think a lot of us thought that would never happen again, and 18 years later, it had happened again, and the two groups had made it happen again.
All products of the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio, the 1225, 4449, and the 765, are representative of a group of nonprofit organizations, largely all volunteer, who have helped safely and efficiently spearhead the steam locomotive preservation movement as it exists today. These groups and others like them primarily exist thanks to the thousands of hours of volunteer work and support from the visiting public, be it in ticket or gift shop sales or donations. In addition to the big three, Flagpole 040 number 75, a roving tank engine known for its appearances around the country as an easily portable steam locomotive, was also at the event. The 75 is privately owned and was restored by John and Barney Gramling and was under operation, allowing visitors to put their hand on the throttle. Making its first public appearance was the Leviathan, an 1860s designed locomotive privately built over the course of 9 years. Viscose 040 number 6 is a privately owned steam locomotive which also travels around the country operating on tourist railroad lines. Coldwater, Michigan's Little River Railroad was represented by its darling 462 number 110, the smallest standard gauge Pacific in the world, and 040 number 1, the smallest operating locomotive at the festival. While steam was an important part of the TrainFestival, the Southern Railway was represented in the form of EMD FP7 number 6133, a gem of first-generation diesel technology. Without the passion and labor of the people behind these visiting locomotives and the support of those they hope to educate and entertain, the history of railroading, so dependent on movement and operation, comes to a standstill. Over the course of the 4 days, each visiting locomotive was operating and under display, joined by numerous model railroaders, vendors, and live steam operators from around the country. Passengers enjoyed 4 mainline all-day excursions behind the visiting steam locomotives.
The live steam track was a huge attraction. We probably broke the record on the amount of people hauled on a miniature scale railroad in one weekend. There was never a train that wasn't full, and the line was always, long. I mean, there was lots and lots of people that wanted to ride it. I watched kids just pull their parents around the facility. I am telling you, there were lots of kids that probably went back and forth from the front and to the back of the facility 5 times during the course of the day, which was no easy task with the amount of people that were in the facility.
TrainFestival was really a team effort like no other. It essentially involved nearly 800 volunteers, vendors, crew members with the trains on the grounds at any given time or out on one of the excursion trains. All of the all-day trains were sold out in advance before the gates even opened.
So much hard work went into this event, and just to see everyone who came together to support it. We found friends that we didn't know we had.
The neatest part for me was standing on top of the coal dock and watching the tank engines pull 1225 to the back and seeing that the crowd was 50 deep the whole length of the railroad, all the way from the front to the back. And I went, wow.
Somebody's trying to call you. I said who it was.
But even after TrainFestival, the work is never ending. As the 4449 departed Owasso in August, labor continued to prepare the 765 and 1225 for a series of photo charters and a special fall foliage doubleheader in October. The work to not only preserve history, but also enliven it for others continues. In May of 2010, Père Marquette number 1225 will fall silent as it is prepped for its federally mandated inspection and rebuilding. In just a short term, the 4449 and others will reach the end of their allotted running time before similar work must be performed to ensure their existence for many years to come. Events like TrainFestival not only underline the importance of these locomotives, but the effort it takes to keep them and our regular railroads running.
In 1995, the rules for operating steam under the Federal Railroad Administration changed greatly. We now have what is called the 15-year or 1,472-day rule, and that basically means that after 15 years or 1,472 operating days under steam, every locomotive has to come down and be completely gone over, and particularly it's in relation to the boiler. A lot of groups at this time also choose to look at several of the other key components, particularly things like running gear and other things on the locomotive at that time, but it is particularly on the boiler. All the tubes have to come out, all the flues have to come out. If you have superheaters, those come out as well. And basically the boiler comes down to its basic, visceral shell.
It's undoubtedly going to be a fairly lengthy process and very expensive process at the same time. But in terms of the longer range plans for SRI, we developed some architectural renderings for what we'd like the site to look like in the future. We're looking at the very least, the installation of a fully functional back shop, roundhouse, and again, doing some more improvements to our site, making it more family and visitor friendly.
As SRI moves forward, 1225, I think, in the way it is used as an educational tool in particular for the organization, I think it's just going to grow.
Once 1225 has gone through the rebuild, we would like to take 1225 on the road. We'd like to do some Amtrak trips. It's been since '91 since 1225 has been out of Michigan, and I want it to happen again once the rebuild is done. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to start a fund, and a little bit of every trip is going to go into a fund so that 15 years from when she comes out of the rebuild, she's going to have enough money to go through it again if she needs to.
After the World's Fairs and railroad expositions of the 1930s and 40s, railroading has been sparsely represented as the important and meaningful cornerstone of the American way of life that it is.
In a very real sense, without the railroads, we wouldn't be where we are today. And this event would not have been the event it was without the help of our fellow railroaders.
Our main goal was to get the general public in and to expose them to the positive side of railroading. with the railroad, the freight that was running, people saw, these freight trains are big and they're hauling a lot of produce, and it's all Michigan. This event was a positive event for a lot of the railroads that were involved, and the railroad officials saw it as, thousands of people came out and watched this steam locomotive come through their town. For people to be standing there at the railroad that usually, holds them up at traffic, at crossings, for these people to be standing there watching something go by and to go, wow, I didn't know that something like that still happened. What it does for the community is something you can't really put a price on. Because of the goodwill that the steam locomotive produces and spreads across the country, it's something that the railroads just can't do any other way.
Thanks to the ceaseless work of the Steam Railroading Institute and TrainFestival 2009, Owasso won't be absent the stirring sights and sounds of its very own piece of history for long.